Hi friends, before we start the story, I hope you use headphones, then close your eyes, then relax with your imagination and live with the story. I hope you finish the story to the last. Support me with like for the video. Let's continue to present the new. Let's go. I think I'm telling this story because I can't escape it. It lives inside me, repeating itself in front of me over and over again. My name is Sarah. Let's assume that's just a name. Maybe I could have told the story of someone else, someone I met by chance on a busy street, or in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. But the truth is, this is not the case. This is my story, and this is my tale as I lived it. The story began many years ago when I first met Jack. We were in high school, a small public school in a suburb of the big city. At that time in my life, I was quiet, somewhat isolated. I walked through the school hallways like a ghost no one could see. I didn't have many friends, nor was I looking for them. My mind was always elsewhere, drowning in my own thoughts about life, the future, and identity. Jack, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He knew everyone, and everyone knew him. He was liked in a way I couldn't explain at the time. He didn't talk much, but he was always present in some way. He had that kind of charisma that made others want to be close to him, even if he didn't make any effort. I watched him from afar, not fully understanding why. He wasn't the type that usually caught my attention, but something about him piqued my curiosity. One day after class, Jack stood near me. It was about 2 weeks into the new school year, and students had already begun forming small groups. I was standing alone in the corner of the school's outdoor field, silently observing everyone. I didn't expect anyone to approach me, but suddenly, I heard his voice behind me. "You're always here, aren't you?" He said it in a calm manner, as if he had known me for a long time. I turned around slowly and saw Jack standing there, smiling softly. That moment was strange, like something out of a movie. I couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to me without a reason or without a previous connection. "Yes, I guess so," I replied cautiously. I wasn't sure of his intentions, or maybe I was afraid this was some kind of joke, but his eyes didn't seem filled with mockery. "Why don't you join the others?" he asked, glancing at the group of students playing basketball in the court. "It seems like you have a lot of time to think." That was true, of course. I had a lot of time to think, maybe more than I should. I felt something strange at that moment. Jack had been watching me just as I had been watching him, as if he was trying to figure something out. From that day, I started noticing Jack more. Or perhaps, he began appearing more in my life. He didn't cling to me or try to stay by my side all the time, but he would show up in unexpected moments, times when I felt the need for something or someone. We would sometimes sit on the wooden benches in the school's backyard, talking about simple things, sometimes about classes or the teachers who got on our nerves, and other times about deeper topics like life and the future. But there was something else, something unspoken, a growing discomfort between us. Within a few months, we became somewhat connected. I wasn't sure if we could call it a relationship, but it was that in a way. We saw each other almost every day, and our conversations grew more personal over time. Jack didn't talk much about himself, but he listened. He listened well, in a way no one had ever listened to me before. And that meant a lot to me. One cold evening, we were sitting in the neglected park behind the school, the air filled with the scent of the approaching winter, and the sky thick with clouds. I felt a kind of heaviness in my chest, that kind of anxiety that you can't quite explain. Jack was beside me, silent as he often was. Silence between us was comfortable at times, but at that moment, it made me even more anxious. "Do you think everything will be okay?" I asked him suddenly, not fully aware of the reason behind the question. He looked at me for a moment before answering, as if thinking about something far away. "I don't know, Sarah. Sometimes I feel like things will never get better. But at other times I think maybe." That word, maybe, carried with it a lot of hope, but also a lot of doubt. Jack wasn't someone who gave clear answers, and that sometimes frustrated me. I wanted certainty. I needed someone to tell me that everything would be fine, even if it wasn't true. As time went on, things began to feel more complicated. Jack would disappear sometimes, gone for a few days, and then return as if nothing had happened. I put up with it, but I began to wonder why. Why was I waiting for him, and why did I accept this uncertainty? Something inside me told me that I wouldn't find anyone else like him, but at the same time, I feared I was losing myself in this undefined relationship. At the end of the school year, we were standing next to each other outside the school. The atmosphere was tense as everyone was anxious about final exams. But for me, something else was weighing on my mind more than grades. "Are you staying here after graduation?" I asked, looking down at the ground. He didn't respond immediately, as if the question had caught him off guard. "I don't know," he answered after a moment. "I'm thinking of going to the big city. Maybe I need a fresh start." My heart sank in my chest. I knew this day would come, but I wasn't ready to hear it out loud. The big city felt far away to me, far enough to feel like the end of a relationship that was never clear or certain. "What about you?" he finally asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "I don't know yet, maybe I'll stay here." We stopped talking, and silence returned again. The final weeks of the school year passed with a painfully slow pace, like an hourglass leaking moments without notice. I was living in a state of confusion, as I always had, but this time, the anxiety was greater. With each passing day, a part of me understood that Jack would be leaving, and with him, a significant piece of my life, one that I barely comprehended. Our relationship, which had never been clearly defined, seemed to be heading toward an inevitable end that I couldn't avoid or stop. A few weeks after our last conversation, Jack announced that he had been accepted into the university he had dreamed of, in the big city. He spoke about it with a quiet enthusiasm that had always been a part of his personality. But I felt the weight of his words as he told me. Everything felt overwhelmingly real. The big city, the university, the dream, all those things that had once seemed like a distant idea were now imminent. "Congratulations," I said with a dry smile, trying to ignore the turmoil I felt inside. "Thanks," he said, looking at me with deep eyes filled with questions I didn't fully understand. It was clear that we were nearing the point of no return. I didn't know if he realized that or if he even cared. But for me, I was desperately searching for a way to hold on to him, even if just for a fleeting moment. The days passed slowly. Our relationship remained the same, filled with little conversation and small moments punctuated by mysterious glances and hidden smiles. I felt that something was waiting for us on the horizon, something I wasn't sure I wanted to face. Would I let him go without saying anything? Without understanding what he truly meant to me? But every time I thought about talking to him about my feelings, I held back, afraid of the outcome. One day, Jack decided to invite me out. It wasn't typical of him to initiate such things. Jack wasn't the kind of person who planned meetups or insisted on arranging specific activities. He usually just sat next to me in silence or talked to me about everyday things. But this time, it was different. "I want to show you something before I leave," he said that day. I had just finished my final review classes, and the air was thick with the smell of approaching rain. "Where?" I asked, surprised by the interest that showed on his face. "Just come with me." Jack led me to the edge of the city. We walked from the center of the neighborhood, passed through the quiet streets where we used to hang out, until we reached an almost deserted area on the outskirts. The sun was about to set, and the sky was turning a deep golden color. The scene was strangely calm, as if the entire city had stopped breathing for a moment. Jack stopped in front of an abandoned place that looked like an old factory, left in ruins for a long time. The building was decayed, with its old iron doors shattered. I didn't understand what he wanted to show me there. "This place. I used to come here a lot when I was younger," he said in a quiet voice, as if talking more to himself than to me. "Why?" I asked, looking at the crumbling building with confused eyes. "I felt lost at that time. Here, in this place, I could think. No one ever comes here. It was like a personal sanctuary for me." I didn't know how to respond to his words. Suddenly, I felt like I was getting to know Jack all over again. That isolation, that sense of being lost that he talked about, felt exactly like what I had been feeling all along. It was as if we had been living in two separate worlds, even though we stood next to each other. I wanted to show you this place before I left. Because, in some way, I felt you would understand. He paused for a moment, then continued. You always seem like you're carrying something heavy inside, just like I felt here. His words carried a heavy weight, as if they were his last confessions before leaving. I sat down next to him on the cold ground, and we let the silence speak. I wanted to say something to him, anything, but the words refused to leave my mouth. I was confused, anxious about losing him, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't stop him from moving forward with his life. After a long moment of silence, I finally looked at him and said, I don't understand why you have to leave. I mean, what if you stayed here? He didn't look directly at me but kept staring into the distance. Sarah, I can't stay here. Everything here makes me feel stuck. Maybe you don't understand that now, but I need to go. And maybe you need that too. What do you mean? I mean you need to be more than just a girl waiting for someone like me. You're strong enough to know that. Those words hurt me in a way I didn't expect. I wanted to scream, to tell him that he didn't know me well enough to say such things. But at the same time, I knew he was right. Everything around us was about to change, and I wasn't ready to face it. In that moment, it was clear that Jack was saying goodbye to me. It wasn't a farewell in words, but in his silence and in his decision to show me this place that meant so much to him, he was giving me a kind of ending. After that night at the abandoned factory, everything seemed to move at a speed beyond my control. I felt as if the ground beneath my feet had started to shake, as if everything that had once been stable was now fragile and unstable. Jack continued with his life as though nothing had changed, while I felt something inside me falling apart. We met at school as usual, but something in our conversations was different, as if an invisible barrier had started to form between us. In the final week before graduation, everything felt like it was moving toward an ending. Students were busy preparing for the celebration and discussing their future plans, but I was lost in my thoughts, unable to stop thinking about the day Jack would leave. Deep down, I knew the moment of his departure was approaching, but I wasn't ready to face it. On the morning of graduation, I woke up earlier than usual. There was a heaviness in my chest, as if the air itself was filled with tension. I looked in the mirror and saw my reflection, a girl standing on the edge of a cliff, about to leap into the unknown. I was wearing my black graduation gown and had tied my hair simply. It felt like I was wearing a mask that didn't represent me. I wasn't ready for the celebration. I wasn't ready for the goodbye. When I arrived at school, everyone was in a state of happy chaos. Students were taking pictures, laughing, and eagerly talking about the future. I felt like I was living in a foggy dream. Everything was happening around me so quickly, but I wasn't sharing in their excitement. Then I saw Jack standing on the other side of the courtyard. He was wearing his graduation gown, but unlike everyone else, he seemed calm. I approached him slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. When I reached him, he looked at me with a slight smile, that same smile I never fully understood. Are you ready? He asked. I'm not sure, I said softly. That's what makes it interesting, isn't it? Not being sure. He paused for a few seconds, then added, Everything will change after today, Sarah. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. I didn't answer, just looked at him, trying to read what was going on in his mind. I knew this was probably the last time we would be together like this, and part of me didn't want to let the moment pass without saying something. Jack, I finally said, but hesitated to continue. Yes? I don't want you to go. It was the first time I admitted that directly. I hadn't planned to say it, but the words escaped me as if they had been trying to break free for a long time. I searched his eyes for any reaction, any sign that might give me hope he'd change his mind. But at first, he didn't say anything, just took a slow breath, as if trying to process what I'd said. Sarah, he said finally, but didn't finish. I knew his response would carry the ending I wasn't ready for. I know it doesn't make sense, but I don't want us to part like this. I didn't realize how close we were until I started feeling like I was losing you." Jack turned fully toward me, and in his eyes there was a hint of sadness, but also a kind of resolve I wasn't prepared to hear. "Sarah, you can't build your life around someone else. You and I were good together, but you need more than that. There's a life waiting for you, a dream you need to chase." I felt a surge of anger rising inside me. I didn't want to hear those typical pieces of advice, those hollow words people use to justify their decisions. "But what about us?" I asked, trying to hold on to the last thread of hope. "I don't know," he said quietly, staring at the ground. "Maybe we're just not ready yet. Maybe we never will be. But that doesn't mean what we had wasn't real." Those words were like a slap to the face, a truth I had been running from all along. I knew our relationship was complicated, that we weren't on a clear path. But I had hoped, even if just for a moment, that he'd choose to stay, that he'd at least try. But he knew what he wanted, and he was willing to leave everything behind. "So this is goodbye?" I asked, trying to hold myself together. "Not necessarily," he said, looking at me deeply. "But for now, maybe it's for the best." Those words left a heavy weight inside me, and I couldn't respond. My heart was confused, filled with thousands of questions I had no answers for. I wondered if he was right. Should we really leave things as they were? Or was I holding on to something I should have let go of long ago? After a few moments of silence, Jack took a step closer and held my hand for a brief moment. His touch was warm, familiar, but at the same time, it felt like a farewell. "Sarah, you're stronger than you think. You'll find your way, even if it's not beside me." Those words were enough to break a part of me, but they also carried a truth I wasn't ready to face. Jack let go of my hand and slowly walked away. There was something in the way he walked off that felt like a scene from a movie, as if everything was ending inevitably, and I had no control over it. I stood there, in the middle of the crowded courtyard, watching the world move around me while I stood still, feeling like a part of me had left with Jack. After the graduation ceremony, everything seemed to turn upside down. Everyone was talking about their futures with an excitement I couldn't feel. They were planning trips, studies, and building new lives. As for me, I felt stuck. Jack's absence weighed on me more than I had expected. I hadn't realized how much I relied on him, even though his presence had always been mysterious and full of contradictions. I kept searching for any sign, any way to return to those moments I spent with him. The first days of summer were painfully quiet. I sat in my room for hours, staring at my phone, going over the old messages Jack and I had exchanged. There weren't many words between us, but within them were the small moments that connected us. I would check my email inbox now and then, hoping for a message from him, but he never reached out. It was as if Jack had completely vanished from my life, leaving behind a void I couldn't fill. The days passed slowly, filled with a killing routine. I'd wake up, have breakfast, do some chores, then spend the rest of the day trying to escape my thoughts. My mom was worried about me, but I didn't want to talk. How could I explain this strange feeling? How could I tell her I felt lost without someone who wasn't even officially a part of my life? One day, while I was sitting in my room lost in thought, I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I slowly got up and headed toward it. I opened the door to find Emma, an old friend from school, standing there with a smile on her face. "Hey," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I haven't seen you since graduation. Are you okay?" A wave of anxiety rushed through me. I had distanced myself from everyone recently, and I didn't want to appear like someone running away from reality. "I'm fine," I replied, not entirely convincingly. "You don't look fine," she said, raising her eyebrows with sympathy. "You've been living in this room for weeks, haven't you?" I didn't answer, just looked at her. It was clear she knew what I was going through, even if I couldn't express it. "I think I need some fresh air," I finally said. Emma smiled and said, "Good. Let's go then." We went out together, and it was the first time I had left the house in days. We went to a small cafe in the neighborhood that was almost empty. Emma and I sat there for a while, talking about simple things, like the weather and movies we had recently seen. The conversation was comforting, but not deep. I felt like I was moving away from the reality of what I was feeling, which was exactly what I needed at that moment. After a while, Emma placed her coffee cup on the table and looked directly at me. "Sarah, what's really going on? No one disappears like this without a reason." I sighed, realizing I couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. "Jack left." There wasn't any obvious sadness in my voice, just a statement of fact. But Emma immediately understood what those words meant. So that's it." I nodded quietly and began to explain how things had ended between Jack and me. I didn't tell her all the details, but I shared the moments where I felt I had lost something important. I talked about the place he had taken me, his final words, and the strong feeling I had that this goodbye wasn't temporary. "Do you love him?" Emma suddenly asked, and it was the first time anyone had asked me that question directly. I felt my heart race. I didn't know the answer, or maybe I was afraid to admit it. "I don't know, maybe?" I said slowly, as if testing the words as they came out. "Sarah," Emma said softly but firmly, "if you love him, why don't you tell him?" I laughed slightly, with a hint of sarcasm. "What's the point? He's already gone, and he's made his decision. I can't change anything now." "Did you try?" she asked. I was silent for a moment, then shook my head. I hadn't tried. The truth was, I had always been afraid to say what I felt. I thought things would fall into place naturally without me needing to intervene. But I was wrong. Jack left because I wasn't honest with myself, or with him. "Sarah, I think he deserves to know. Even if it doesn't change anything, at least you'll have the peace of mind that you did what you needed to do." Emma's words stayed with me after that conversation. I started to wonder, had I been living in fear this whole time? Had I been letting things happen to me without trying to influence them? Jack had been a big part of my life, even if I hadn't admitted it. Maybe it was time to face the truth of my feelings. In the days that followed, I began to feel closer to a decision. I wasn't sure if I could win Jack back, but I felt the need to tell him what I had been too afraid to say. In the days following my conversation with Emma, I found myself thinking a lot about what she had said. The idea of confronting Jack and telling him how I felt was terrifying, but I started to realize that I couldn't move forward without being honest with both him and myself. Something inside me was growing, a sense of boldness, or perhaps just a desperate desire for closure to everything that had happened between us. I finally decided to write to him. I didn't know exactly where he was, but I was sure email was the only way to reach him. I sat in front of my computer screen for hours, trying to compose the message, but each attempt felt empty and inadequate. How could I put all my feelings into a few words? How could I explain everything to him? It felt more like I was writing a goodbye rather than starting something new. Finally, after several drafts and failed attempts, I decided to keep it simple and straightforward. No wordplay, no lengthy explanations, just the truth. "Jack, I know I've never been clear with you, and things between us have always been more complicated and silent than they should have been. But I feel like I have to tell you this now, even if it's too late. I was afraid to say how I felt, afraid of seeming weak or of losing you. But now, seeing you move forward with your life, I realize I can't continue in silence. The truth is, I loved you, and maybe I still do. I know this might not change anything, and you've probably already decided what's best for you. But at least now, I know I've said what needed to be said. I wish you all the happiness and success, Jack. Sarah." After I wrote the message, I felt like I had lifted a burden that had been weighing me down for months. I didn't have high expectations for a reply. In fact, I didn't expect one at all. It was just a way to express what I had been hiding for so long. After pressing send, I sat for a moment, feeling empty, as if I had been running for a long time and had finally stopped. The days that followed were spent waiting for something, anything. I checked my email more often than usual, but there was no response from Jack. Part of me knew this was the most likely outcome. Maybe the message didn't reach him, or maybe he read it and chose to ignore it. Either way, I tried to come to terms with it. About a week later, in a moment when I wasn't expecting it at all, I received a notification of a new email. It was from Jack. My heart raced as his name appeared on the screen. I stared at the message for a few seconds, afraid to open it, unsure of what might be inside. What if he rejected me? What if he said something that made things even harder? Finally, I gathered my courage and opened the message. Sarah, I've read your message more than once. To be honest, I didn't expect to hear from you in this way, and I wasn't prepared for your words. I can't deny that I felt something for you all along. There was always something between us, something inexplicable, but it was real. But I decided to leave not because I didn't care about you, but because I felt like we needed something bigger than this place. I felt lost, and I think I still do. Maybe we need this time apart to figure out what we really want. I know this might not be the answer you were hoping for, but it's the only truth I have right now. I wish you all the best, Sarah. Jack. I read the message slowly, trying to absorb every word. It wasn't the answer I had hoped for or expected, but it held a kind of honesty that I couldn't deny. Jack didn't make any promises, but he also didn't completely close the door. It was as if he left things open-ended, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to wait. I began to reflect on what Jack had said and how both of us had been searching for something we didn't fully understand. I felt like I had been living in a small, confined world, a world I didn't know how to break out of, but it was familiar and safe to me. But Jack was different. He was searching for freedom, for something bigger, and maybe the time and place weren't right for us. After reading his message, I felt the need to change something. Maybe it was time to focus on my own life, away from Jack, to start thinking about what I truly wanted. For so long, I had been living in a state of waiting, as if I was putting my life on hold for Jack to decide. But now I realized that I had been wrong. I decided to break out of that cycle. I reconnected with old friends, started spending time with Emma and others, and began thinking about my future. I joined art workshops and started enjoying my time learning new things. It wasn't easy. There was always something missing, but I began to learn how to live with that emptiness, how to deal with the memories without letting them control me. Weeks passed, and months, and life slowly returned to its natural course. As the months passed, I found myself in a new place, somewhere I hadn't expected or planned for. It wasn't easy to let go of all the memories and moments I had shared with Jack. There was always something that reminded me of him, whether it was a song, a place, or even something as simple as seeing a book we had once talked about. But slowly, and in an unexpected way, I began to feel that I was healing. I started spending more time with Emma, who became more than just a friend. She was a steady source of support during this phase. We would go out often, visit cafes, art galleries, and even watch movies as if we were trying to rediscover life. I was learning how to live again without clinging to another person or holding on to an idea of love that perhaps wasn't strong enough to last. One night, while I was sitting in my room listening to soft music, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw an unexpected name. It was Sam. Sam was a classmate from school, one of those people I hadn't seen much after graduation, but he was always kind to both me and Jack. I slowly picked up the phone, wondering why he was calling at this time. "Hello, Sam," I said quietly. "Hey, Sarah. How are you?" His voice was familiar, but there was something different about his tone. It didn't carry the usual energy I remembered. "I'm fine, and you?" I asked, trying to be friendly. "I wanted to talk to you about something, if you have time." I paused for a moment. This was strange. Sam and I weren't close enough for him to ask something like this. "Of course. What's it about?" Sam was silent for a moment, then said, "It's about Jack." Time seemed to freeze when I heard Jack's name. I wasn't ready to hear this, especially after months of trying to forget him, or at least move past what had happened between us. "What about Jack?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, Jack is back in town." Those words were enough to stir everything inside me again, as if I had returned to those first moments after he left, that pain mixed with questions that never found answers. I felt my breath quicken, and my heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" I asked, unsure if I even wanted to hear the answer. "He came back about a week ago. He's been traveling for a while, but I heard he recently returned and settled somewhere nearby." I couldn't respond at first. I felt like I was caught between two conflicting desires. One part of me wanted to know everything about him, to see him again and confront him, while another part screamed for distance, to avoid falling back into the same spiral that had cost me so much. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, trying to understand Sam's motives. "I thought you might want to know. I know things between you two were complicated. And I think maybe he wants to see you." That last sentence sparked all kinds of doubts and fears inside me. Why would Jack want to see me now? What did he want after all this time? "Why do you think that? Did he say something to you?" I asked, trying to get a clearer picture. "He didn't say it directly, but I've seen him a few times and he's asked about you. He seemed like he wanted to talk to you but didn't know how to start." I went silent. I needed time to process everything Sam had just said. The idea that Jack was back and might want to see me wasn't easy. I had spent months trying to let go of him, trying to build my life outside of his shadow. Was I ready to face all of that again? "Where is he now?" I asked eventually. "I think he's in his new apartment. I don't know the exact address, but I can find out if you want." I hesitated for a moment. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a major decision, one that could either take me back to where I started or give me the answer I had been searching for all this time. No need for that now," I said quickly. "I'll think about it." "Of course, Sarah. Take your time. If you need anything, I'm here." After ending the call, I sat on my bed for a while, thinking about what I should do. I wasn't sure. Did I really need to face Jack? What would his reaction be if he saw me? Did he really want to come back into my life, or was it just a feeling of regret for what he left behind? The next few days passed slowly. I felt like I was in a state of anticipation, as if everything around me was waiting for the moment when I would decide whether to let Jack back into my life or not. But something felt different. I was no longer the girl who waited for his approval, or hoped he would return to fill the void he had left behind. I had changed, or at least I was trying to. One night, while I was at our usual cafe with Emma, I told her everything. I needed to hear another perspective, someone who knew me well enough to tell me the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. "Emma, Jack's back." Those words were enough to make her raise her eyebrows in surprise. "What? How?" I told her what Sam had said, and how Jack might want to get in touch with me. I expected Emma to be excited or encouraging, but she was more cautious than I anticipated. "Sarah, listen, I know you still have feelings for him. But do you really think his return now will be any different?" That was the question I had been avoiding. Could Jack have changed? And had I changed enough to handle this situation differently? "I don't know," I said quietly. "But I don't want to live my life wondering what could have been." Emma sighed and took a sip of her coffee before saying, "I understand. But just make sure you're doing this for yourself, not because you think he'll fix everything." Her words were heavy, but they were honest. After talking with Emma, I realized that I needed some time to decide whether to open the door to the past again. I was caught in a loop of thoughts that haunted me day and night. Everything related to Jack had left a deep mark, but it also pulled me back to those moments when I felt lost. I was hesitant, afraid of falling into the same trap I had been trying to escape from for the past months. Yet deep inside, there was a feeling I couldn't ignore. I needed to close this chapter, whether by confronting Jack or letting him go completely. So, I finally decided to meet him. I wasn't looking for a happy ending or magical answers. I just needed to know the truth, to find out if what we had was truly over, or if there was something to build upon. I sent him a brief, cold, and practical email. "Jack, I heard you're back. If you'd like to meet, I'll be at the cafe we used to go to on Saturday at 5 p.m. Sarah." I didn't want to come across as eager or hesitant, just straightforward and clear. I wasn't sure if he would respond, but I felt I had done what needed to be done. Now, all that was left was to wait. The days passed slowly until Saturday came. I didn't know if Jack would show up, but I prepared myself for both possibilities. I sat at our usual table in the cafe, wearing a light jacket despite the warm weather. I was nervous, feeling my heart race. Every passing minute heightened my anxiety and tension. At 5:05, as I stared at the door, I saw him walk in. He looked a bit different, but his eyes still carried that look I hadn't forgotten. He was wearing a simple shirt and jeans, yet there was something intangible about his presence, something that made me feel like time hadn't changed him much. He approached me slowly, with a mix of nervousness and caution on his face. We didn't exchange smiles, just long, silent glances before he sat down across from me. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," I replied, trying to stay calm despite the storm inside me. Neither of us knew how to start. There were so many things we needed to talk about, but in that moment, silence prevailed. Jack took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for sending me the message. I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk." "I wasn't sure either," I answered, looking directly at him. "But I felt like I needed to know the truth." Jack looked at the table for a moment before raising his eyes to meet mine. "The truth is that I didn't know what I was doing when I left. I was running away, perhaps from myself more than from you. I wasn't ready to take any responsibility, and I thought distance would be the solution. But I was wrong." His voice was filled with regret, but there was no attempt at justification. That was a new trait in Jack. He no longer tried to soften things or avoid facing the truth. He was straightforward, perhaps more than I expected. "Then why are you back now?" I asked calmly, trying to control my emotions. Jack took a moment before answering. "I came back because I realized I couldn't run from everything. I needed to face what I left behind, to be honest with myself and with you. I didn't come back to ask you to return or to fix what I broke. I came back because I realized I owe you an explanation and myself some clarity." I listened to his words, trying to understand his intentions. Was this an admission of wanting to apologize? Or was it just an attempt to close this chapter? I felt I needed more clarity, more answers. "And now what?" I asked, in a neutral tone. "Do you think this conversation will change anything?" He looked at me deeply, as if searching for the right answer. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know if we can go back to what we were. But I realize that I don't want to leave things unfinished. I want to be honest with you this time." Those words felt like a stab to my chest. Honesty, something I had yearned for from the beginning. But now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if we could build something new on that belated honesty. "I think we've changed, Jack," I said, looking at him seriously. "What we had was always complicated. I loved you, but I didn't know how to deal with you or with myself. I was always looking for you to solve my problems, while you were running away from them." Jack looked at me with sadness, but he didn't interrupt. "Now I don't want to return to that spiral. I've spent the past months trying to understand who I am apart from you. Maybe this is the first time I feel like I know what I want." "And what do you want now?" he asked, as if the answer was as important to him as it was to me. I took a deep breath and said, "I want to live my life in a new way. I want to be honest with myself. And I think I need to start from here, away from anything that might pull me back." Jack was silent, as if my words carried a weight he hadn't expected. Then he said quietly, "I understand. And I think you're right. What we had was always tangled and complicated, and maybe we were trying to hide that truth more than we were facing it." I felt I had finally reached a point of clarity. I still had feelings for Jack in some way, but love alone wasn't enough to fix everything. There was something bigger, something about independence and self-reconciliation. "So," Jack said softly, "is this goodbye?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "I think it's a kind of goodbye, yes. But it's not a tragic farewell. Maybe it's a new beginning for both of us, but each of us will go our own way." Jack smiled with that sad smile I knew well. "I think you're right." Maybe this is the time we needed to understand. He slowly got up, not attempting to extend a hand or come closer. There was respect in his demeanor, respect for what we had and what had ended. I wish you all the happiness, Sarah, he said quietly before turning and leaving the cafe. I sat in my place, feeling that something had finally closed. There was no deep sadness or sense of defeat. Just relief. Relief that I had faced the truth, that I realized I was strong enough to move on, even without Jack. At that moment, I felt ready for the future. After Jack left, I sat alone in the cafe for a while, feeling a mix of relief and emptiness. Something deep inside me had truly ended, but at the same time, I realized I was on the brink of a new phase, one I didn't know much about, but which seemed full of possibilities. I picked up my coffee cup and took a sip, while my thoughts churned like waves. I felt as though I had been freed from something that had weighed me down for a long time. The conversation with Jack, that moment of mutual honesty, gave me a clarity I hadn't expected. Yet there was something else, a vague feeling I couldn't name. Was it fear? Was it sadness? Or perhaps just the realization that I was finally starting to live my life on my terms, and that those terms would be completely different from what I was used to. When I got home that night, the streets were empty except for a few passers-by I didn't pay attention to. The city seemed quiet, but inside me, something new was taking shape, something that was solely mine. As I entered my apartment, I felt the usual silence, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been before. The room seemed larger, as if it mirrored what I felt inside, an emptiness, but one that I could now fill with something new. I sat on the bed, looking at my phone. Emma had sent me a text. "How did it go? Did you talk to him?" I wanted to reply immediately, but I felt I needed some time before I could share what had happened. I wrote back. "Yes, we talked. I'll tell you everything later." I set the phone aside and lay down on the bed. That night, I slept well for the first time in a long while. In the days following the meeting with Jack, I began to feel like I was gradually regaining control of my life. I resumed work and focused more on writing. I was working on a new project, a story about a woman living her life after a difficult breakup. I poured a lot of myself into this story. In a way, it represented everything I had been through over the past months. Writing had always been my refuge, but now it felt even more important, as if it was the only way I could understand myself and what I had been through. One day, while working in a small cafe near my apartment, I saw Emma walk in. We hadn't talked much since my meeting with Jack, but I knew she had been waiting for answers. "Hi," she said enthusiastically as she sat down across from me. I smiled and closed my laptop. "Hi, how are you?" "I'm good, but I've been waiting for this moment for days," she said, looking at me with curiosity. "What happened with Jack?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. About our conversation, the mutual honesty, and the decision we eventually reached. "I don't think I wanted to go back to what we had," I said calmly. "I realized that we maybe weren't right for each other in the way we thought. And I had to accept that truth." Emma listened attentively, then said, "I think you did the right thing. You've been through so much with him, and maybe it was time to leave it all behind." I nodded. "Yes, but it's not that simple. There's a part of me that will always wonder what could have been." "That's natural," Emma said, placing her hand on mine. "But the important thing is that you're in a better place now. And I think this meeting was necessary for both of you." I wanted to believe her words, and I did feel that I had freed myself from some of the burdens that had weighed me down. But at the same time, I was starting to realize the complexity of that relationship. Not everything had been bad or painful. There had been moments of true happiness and memories I wouldn't forget easily. After meeting with Emma, I began spending more time thinking about the future. I no longer felt stuck in the past, but I wasn't sure what awaited me ahead. I needed a new challenge, something that would excite me. One day, that opportunity came. I was working at my desk when I received an email from a publishing house. They had heard about my writing and offered me a chance to work with them on a new project. The offer was tempting, but it required me to travel to another city for a period of time. When I read the email, I felt a wave of excitement and anxiety at the same time. This was what I had been looking for, a new opportunity, a fresh start. But at the same time, I was scared of leaving everything I had built here. Emma, my friends, my daily life. Was I ready to leave all that behind? That night, I sat with myself, thinking about my options. I knew this opportunity might not come again, and it could be exactly what I needed to start anew. But was I ready for the big change it would bring? In the end, I decided not to let fear hold me back. My life had been filled with fear of big decisions, but this time, I felt I needed to take the risk. I sent a response to the publishing house, expressing my enthusiasm for accepting the offer. When I told Emma about my decision, she was excited for me but also a bit sad. "I'm going to miss you," she said, hugging me. "And I'll miss you too," I said with a sad smile. "But I feel like this is what I need right now." The days leading up to the move were filled with tension and anticipation. I was packing up my things and preparing to relocate to a new city, to a new life. There were many unknowns, but I finally felt like I was taking control of my future. On the day I boarded the plane, I felt a mix of sadness and excitement. I was leaving behind everything I knew, but I was also opening a new chapter, a chapter full of possibilities. I sat in my plane seat and looked out the window. As the plane began to move, I felt that thrill that comes with new beginnings. I arrived in the new city on a bright morning. The weather was splendid, the sky clear, as if promising a fresh start. As I disembarked from the plane and headed towards the hotel I had booked temporarily, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The city was unfamiliar and new, each corner carrying a sense of both renewal and apprehension. The project I was working on with the publishing house required a lot of focus and creativity. They were planning to release a collection of short stories about various experiences, and I had signed on to write about personal transformation and self-discovery. It was a great opportunity for me, and I was determined to make the most of it. In the first few days, I spent time exploring the new city. There were charming markets, delightful cafes, and comfortable streets inviting you to wander. I found myself enjoying every moment of discovering new details. But at the same time, there were feelings of loneliness. I missed the familiarity and the friends I had left behind. The city was too large to fully get to know quickly, but I was trying to carve out a place for myself. As the weeks went by, I began to adjust to my new routine. I went to the office every day, working on the stories I had been assigned. There was a sense of freedom in the work, but it was also accompanied by new pressures. Everything required precision and creativity, and the deadlines were constantly looming. During my time in the new city, I met some people who became part of my new life. Among them was Thomas, an editor from the publishing house who worked closely with me. Thomas was a man in his late 30s, with a charming personality and sharp intellect. We interacted professionally, but over time, I began to feel that something was developing between us. We had many discussions about literature and art, and we shared numerous interests. One evening, after a long day at work, we decided to go out for dinner together. It was an opportunity to talk in a more informal setting, away from the office atmosphere. Our conversation flowed easily and naturally, and it felt like we were meeting regularly. "Sarah, do you have any plans for the weekend?" Thomas asked as we were having dinner at a small restaurant. "No, actually, I don't have any specific plans." "Why do you ask?" "We were thinking of going to the literary festival happening in the city. There will be a group of writers and creatives, and it could be beneficial for you to attend." I was excited about the idea. Literary festivals had always been inspiring for me, and it was a great opportunity to meet others in the same field. "I think that would be wonderful. Thank you for the invitation." As time passed, I began to enjoy my time in the new city. However, while I continued to adapt to my new life, I started to notice that my thoughts occasionally drifted back to Jack. It wasn't frequent, but those memories were not entirely distant. I sometimes wondered about his life and how things were going for him after I left. These thoughts would come unexpectedly, stirring a kind of nostalgia I was trying to move away from. One evening, while working on one of the stories, my phone rang. It was a text message from Emma. "How's it going? I hope you're doing well. I heard about the literary festival. It sounds amazing." I replied. "Everything is going well here. I'm really enjoying the new city. Yes, the festival will be exciting. I'll fill you in on all the details." I took a deep breath and went back to work. I felt that I was finally able to build on myself in a way I hadn't imagined before. In those moments, I focused on the present and enjoyed the challenges and new opportunities it brought. The city offered something new every day, leaving little time to dwell excessively on the past. However, with the beginning of the festival, I felt I might meet some people who could have a more significant impact on my life. Perhaps there was something on the horizon, something that could reignite the excitement within me and offer a chance for further change and growth. During one of the festival days, while browsing through various literary works, I met a new person. He was a well-known writer renowned for his creativity and ability to write in a style that captivated readers of all tastes. There was something intriguing about his presence, and our conversation was filled with inspiration and new challenges. That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, where I felt I was finally starting to explore new aspects of my life and new facets of myself. Weeks had passed since the start of the literary festival, and I felt that I had become more deeply integrated into this new city. Conversations and discussions about literature and art had positively influenced me, and Thomas had become an important part of both my professional and personal life. Our relationship was gradually evolving, and our frequent visits to restaurants and cafes fueled our exchange of ideas and opinions. One day, after spending the morning at the public library, we decided to visit an art exhibition being held at a large gallery in the city. I was excited to see the artwork, but I also sensed something vague about Thomas. There was an emotional connection that I needed to understand. When we arrived at the gallery, we were greeted by inspiring atmospheres and vibrant colors. We began to wander among the paintings and artworks, discussing everything that came to mind. Thomas tended to delve deeply into each piece, and it was clear that he had a genuine passion for art. "Sarah, do you notice how these paintings express the contrast between light and darkness?" Thomas asked, directing my attention to a stunning painting. "Yes, it's striking. I think the artist might be trying to convey internal conflict through these colors." "Exactly. And it makes me think about the complexity of human emotions. Sometimes we're like these paintings. We need contrasts to understand ourselves." I felt that his words touched a deep part of me, and I realized that there was something beyond just professional friendship between us. However, I wasn't sure if it was the right time to discuss my feelings, especially after everything I had been through before. When we finished our tour of the exhibition, we sat at a nearby cafe for coffee. I enjoyed our conversation, but at the same time, I felt confused. Thomas was enriching me with ideas, and I had a sense that our relationship could be something more than just friendship. "Sarah, there's something I want to tell you," Thomas said suddenly, looking at me seriously. "We've had a great time together, and I feel a strong connection with you. But I also know that you've been through difficult experiences in the past, and I want to be honest with you." My heart raced, but I tried to stay calm. "What do you mean?" "I mean that we might be able to build something beautiful together. But I want you to know that I value your clarity and honesty, and I want to be your friend first before anything else." I was grateful for his honesty, but at the same time, I needed time to think. Transitioning from one phase to another was not easy, especially after what I had experienced with Jack. "I need some time to think, Thomas. This isn't something that can be taken lightly, and I want to be sure that I'm acting based on what I truly feel." Thomas nodded, saying, "I completely understand. Take your time, and we can discuss this later." As days passed, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I felt a renewed sense of excitement and a desire to build something new, but I was also aware of the need to be honest with myself and others about what I wanted. There was another thought occupying my mind, even though I was enjoying the new city and felt it was reigniting my enthusiasm and passion. Memories of Jack still occasionally resurfaced. especially when I thought about the past and whether there was something I could learn from that previous relationship. One evening, while preparing to attend a literary event, I received an unexpected email. It was from Jack. There was something in the message that intrigued me, so I read it carefully. Sarah, I apologize for the delay in reaching out. I've wanted to send you a message for a while but wasn't sure of the right way to do it. I just wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about you a lot and that I appreciate everything we had. If you have time, I'd like to talk. I read the message several times, feeling a mix of shock and hesitation. I wasn't sure if I wanted to reconnect with him. It wasn't about needing closure, but there were some feelings I thought I had moved past. However, with all that I had experienced in the new city and all the people I had met, I felt it was time to face the past clearly. Perhaps now was the right moment. I decided to reply to the message, but in a way that didn't open the door to an old relationship. I wrote, Jack, thank you for your message. I'm doing well and living a new experience here. I think we both need time to regain our balance. I appreciate your words and wish you all the best. I sent the message and closed my eyes for a moment, as if I had finally closed an old door for good. With that step, I felt that I was preparing for a new future, full of possibilities and hope, and I looked forward to the next stage in my life, whatever it might be. A few weeks had passed since I received Jack's message, and many things in my life had changed. I continued to work on my literary projects with enthusiasm, and my relationship with Thomas had become clearer. Over time, I began to realize that the feelings I had for him were growing slowly but were genuine and sincere. One day, as the city was preparing for winter, I decided to host a small dinner party at my new apartment. I wanted to share some appreciation with the new friends I had made here, including Thomas. The party was an opportunity for me to strengthen the social connections that had begun to form in my life. The atmosphere in the apartment was cozy and warm, with dim lights and the soft glow of candles on the table. Soft music added a touch of romance to the ambience, and I spent most of the day preparing delicious meals. When Thomas arrived, he brought a bottle of fine wine. Hi, Sarah, he said with a smile. This is for the welcome. I hope dinner is great. Thank you, Thomas. Come on in, let me show you where to sit. I invited him to join the meal, and we enjoyed a delicious dinner, exchanging conversations on various topics. The conversations flowed smoothly, and the atmosphere was relaxed. That evening, I felt a sense of inner calm. I realized that I was beginning to regain my confidence in myself and my future. It had been a while since I felt this comfortable, and everything seemed to be in place. My relationship with Thomas was in a good place, with no rush. We were taking things slowly and discovering each other gradually, and I believed this approach was right for us. As the guests chatted, Thomas and I sat in a corner of the apartment. He seemed in a calm mood, and there was a sense of intimacy between us that made me feel completely at ease. Sarah, Thomas said seriously, I want to talk to you about something. We've had a great time together, and I feel that things are heading in the right direction. But there's something I want to tell you. I took a deep breath. What do you mean, Thomas? I want you to know that I cherish every moment we spend together. I believe that what we have is something real. I want to be honest with you about my feelings and hope you'll be honest with me as well. I felt my heart flutter. I also value you a lot, Thomas. You've become an important part of my life. But I want to be sure that we see things the same way. I need some time to think about this. He nodded in agreement. I completely understand. Don't rush into any decisions. What matters to me is that we're honest with each other. In the following weeks, I felt relieved that I was finally able to build my life the way I wanted. Days passed naturally, with work, writing, and enjoying time with Thomas and my new friends. One evening, after a long day of work, I decided to visit one of the new art galleries in the city. It was a good opportunity to escape the daily routine and explore more of the city's cultural aspects. As I viewed the artwork, I felt a sense of tranquility. I found that each painting and piece of art expressed my emotions in an indirect way. Art reflected the development and growth I felt within myself. When I returned to the apartment, I found a new message from Emma. "Sarah, I heard that you're starting to feel settled in the new city. I hope everything is going well. Wishing you all the best in this new chapter of your life." I replied with a thank you message, updating her on my recent developments. Her words were filled with warmth and encouragement, and it made me feel supported every step of the way. At the end of this chapter in my life, I felt grateful for every experience I had gone through. Life had presented me with many challenges and opportunities, and I had come to realize that every step I took contributed to shaping who I am today. Both Jack and Thomas had left their mark on my life, but each experience was significant in its own way. I appreciated what I had with Jack and valued the new relationship I was starting with Thomas. With everything I had learned, I felt stronger and more confident. I was ready to face any new challenges, knowing that life always offers a new chance for change and growth. As the city prepared to enter winter, I was ready to embrace a new chapter in my life, full of hope and inspiration. I knew that everything in life changes, but what remains is our ability to adapt and grow through every experience. Just as the city was gradually transitioning into a new season, I too was beginning a new chapter in my life, with courage and optimism. Thank you for listening.